In this video, I'm going to show you this shed build. This is a DIY shed build. This is the very first video I am uploading to my brand new YouTube channel, DIY House Projects. The first thing I needed to do for my shed build was prepare where I was going to build it. So I leveled out a spot in the backyard after cutting down trees and removing the stumps and everything. Not only did I level it, but I also dug down an extra foot deep around the perimeter. And that was the intention was to get more of a footer naturally built in. And then I put a 2-foot tall fence down into the ground. Actually, I put the fence in before I put the stone and everything in. And that fence is going to be used to keep rodents from burrowing under the shed and building nests and stuff. Now, right here, what I'm showing you is you want to measure corner to corner once your foundation piece is basically built. And that measurement should be the same to indicate that your structure is square. If that's not the same, if your measurements are not the same, you're going to have issues. So this is a look of the build. I used pressure treated. Now this side, the wood was a little bit bowed. That's kind of what I'm showing here. It bends a little bit out. So I'm going to compensate for that as I'm putting the floor pieces on. So you can see the fence and the stone there. I decided to build right on the stone and not have any kind of air gap or anything because I actually have an environmental degree from Penn State, and I used to have a mold remediation company, and I understand how humidity and temperature works, and you really don't want open airspace air flowing under there because you can have humidity and mold can grow from that. So anyhow, that was the purpose for that. Now I'm cutting some of the floorboards that are going to be put in place. These have a tongue and groove edge on them, and you don't want the seam or edge of the boards to line up from one board to the next for the next row. And so that is the reason why I'm cutting the boards, is just to prepare to put on the floor. So it was a prefabricated shed, all the pieces are already cut, and the truck for the delivery, he had to actually park all the way down the road and then drove the shed parts up on a little dolly type thing, which was an interesting little experience. So the shed is in this box right here. And although it's sunny right now, it is actually going to rain pretty heavily throughout the night. And I didn't want all of the shed pieces out in the rain. So what I decided to do was open the box, bring everything into the garage piece by piece. And then decided I was going to start building the parts in the garage just to get a head start. So I'm starting on these are going to be for the roof. So because the board, the span is so long for the first one, you actually have to connect two boards together. So you have to glue them and everything. And so I used them as a template on the floor to try to make sure that all of the roof components are the exact same size, and all the angles are the same. Now I'm using screws for this, just in case I have to make any changes. Here on the top I'm using nails, but areas where there's a concern of needing to make any modifications, I'm typically going to use screws. And then I went to work on building the walls. Just using a nail gun. I will provide a link for a nail gun in the description. They're a great tool to have. I bought this nail gun years ago when I was building an addition on my house when I lived back in Pennsylvania. And this nail gun, I got it as a set for fairly inexpensively. I've built, like I said, a whole addition. I've built other sheds with this nail gun. I'm building this one, and it's just been a great tool to have, and it's still working, thanks be to God. There is the roof pieces. There's all my wall pieces that I built. So now I mentioned that one board was bowed, and I'm showing it here. You can see how it's sticking out farther than the flooring piece now. And then when we get toward the other end, it's going to come back and be underneath of that blue. See that? And so that just shows that the floor is a bit bowed. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to secure one of the corners. And let me just show you along this edge too. There's it comes out slightly, so I'll tap that in as well. So this you can just pull in by hand to get it square. But I'm going to use a come along, and I'm going to attach it to the fence over here, and I'm actually going to pull the flooring a little bit. I'll show you here in just a second. Okay, so the come along is hooked up to the bottom of the post where it's strongest. I'm using some climbing rope that I have, and the come along. And so I'm going to attach it to the middle of the floor here, and I'm going to, secure one side of the board. And I did put rebar in all the corners to try to keep the corners from moving. So all four corners that's about a 4-foot long piece of rebar pounded down into the ground just to help keep the whole thing from moving. Now I'll just crank the come along a little bit. You'll watch the floor kind of sliding here. So the rebar is keeping the corners in place. And now if you look along that same edge, I'm just videoing from the other side of it. It's much closer than it was before. And once I get it just right, I secure that edge. And then I actually came a little too far. I need to come back a little bit, so I release that. I need to tap it just a little bit to get it to go back for securing that second floorboard. And after I did that, this is the other adjacent edge that I mentioned you could do by hand. So I'm just kind of going along that edge, holding it by hand, making sure it's square to the edge of the board. And you got to make sure you stay hydrated. You got to stop and take water breaks. I just mentioned that if you're going to do any projects like this, really important to stay hydrated. So here's the cut board, and that enables the seams of these boards to not line up with the seams of that first row. So the first row had two 8-foot long, 4-foot wide sheets of flooring. This has got one 4-foot, and I cut the other in half and put it on the end. So those seams do not line up. And while I'm working, I had a friendly neighborhood visitor. A wild turkey decided to walk through the yard. Random occurrence, has never happened like this before. So I had to stop and video that for you. That was pretty cool. Now we got to get back to work though. So once I have all my floorboards laid on, I just go ahead and secure everything down. And I'm using the nail gun for this, just quick and easy. One thing I'm doing is I'm using my square there just to help me make sure I stay on that floor joist. I just kind of run the nails along the edge of that square there. Then once the floor is secured, I go ahead and put the walls together. Now you can see there's a little bit of a bow in that wall, so it's not perfectly square. So as I put the wall pieces on, I'm going to do the same trick I did for the flooring. I'll secure the edge, and then I will manually move the wall so that it is, flex it so that it goes on square. Now on these outside edges, I'm using screws so that I can make adjustments in the squaring up process. But then on the rest of the wall stud 2x4s, I'll just use the nail gun for that. So these pieces have a little bit of an overlap right on the edge of them. But I'm just doing the outside, the top edge first, and then I'm gonna, you know, square everything up and then put all the rest of the nails in after everything's square. All right, got it all squared up, and now I'm just running up and down, throwing in the nails. Now these nails are shorter than the framing nails I used on the walls, like to you know, nail all the joists and stuff together. I actually filmed this video a year ago from when I'm putting it together right now, because I've been busy with my other channel, my Sean's Outdoor Adventures YouTube channel. So in this situation, when I was going through all the old footage, I lost a video file. The video file I lost is how I erected the wall, so I'm gonna draw a picture for you to show you how I basically did it. So as you can see, the floor of the shed had the wall laying on it. So basically what I did is, let's just say that the wall is laying right here. I stood the wall up, so I picked it up at this end and I walked toward the outside edge, kind of walked it up like this, and I had my drill on my hip here, and I also had a 2x4. So when I walked the wall up like this, I drilled one screw through the top of the 2x4. It was only about 4 feet long, 3 feet long, and into one of the joists, or not, one of the wall studs, I mean, right kind of in the middle. So the 2x4 was laying like this, and because there's one screw, it can pivot. Then what I did is I took a level and I laid it against the wall this way until it was plumb. When it was plumb, meaning the wall was perfectly vertical, I screwed this end into the floor. And I did it in multiple locations along the wall. I then did the same thing standing up the wall on this side and made sure it was all square and plumb, as well as square along the edge, you know, where it connected to the other wall. And then I secured that one with a 2x4 on a, like a 45-degree angle, the same way. I did that on all the walls, and so those supports kind of help hold the walls in place in a vertical position. Then I put the joist hangers on the tops of the walls. So when I went to start erecting these roof joist pieces, I ran into a problem. Well, I realized I had a problem. So it wasn't perfectly straight all the way across. It kind of bowed with the way I built it on the cement floor in my garage. So I had to actually correct that on the fly. And this is after the outside wall board is connected to it. So I had to disconnect it, and then I needed to cut the 2x4s a little bit shorter and redo everything. So I did that, and then here is the joist hangers, and the holes line up with each other on both sides. And so when you're running a screw in from one side, if you're running it straight, it's going to hit the screw likely coming in from the other side. So I was running those in on angles. And then when I was putting up the some of the finishing board on the outside, I was starting off by putting screws into it while it was on the ground to make it easier, and then I would just hold it in place and screw it the rest of the way in. Obviously you can do this with nails, and the kit actually comes with nails for a lot of this stuff, but you know, it's easier to do with screws, so I was using screws. These joist hangers are really nice because you just set the joist in there, you get it where you want it, and then you run these screws in. I mean, the kit comes with nails, but I just felt like it's easier to run screws in there than try to hammer in that little tight spot with the way that it's constructed. So then when it comes to the roof, the boards are all pre-cut, but I also just laid out my boards before I got up on there and started to nail them on. I got all the boards laid out for both sides of the roof. When it came to putting the doors on, you could see there's a gap there, and it didn't go flush against the board. So it's just an easy way for insects to get in and stuff like that. So what I decided to do is to get more of a flush fit so that there was no air gap there, is I got a chisel out so that I could chisel just a little bit to get that little bracket piece to go over and flush against the edge. Look in there on the screen. Can you see this? Thank you. Now, while I was doing the chisel work, I had my 7-year-old operating the camera for me, and so the video work is not professional quality. We have 7-year-old video quality work happening here as I'm using the chisel to just chisel out that little bit of siding, finished siding, so that the hinge rests in there and we don't have that big air gap. Now, I just mentioned for a chisel, it's best to get one with metal all the way through to the back end of the handle, and you're hitting metal as opposed to plastic. They do make cheap ones that are plastic handles, so just pointing that out. And that's how the door closes and locks. So there's the shed. I didn't film putting on the roof, and I probably should have, but I didn't. Maybe someday I should make a video on how to put a roof on. I actually posted these pictures a year ago on my Sean's Outdoor Adventures Facebook page and Instagram, and somebody commented on there who is a professional contractor and said that my roof was straighter and looked better than a lot of the roofs he has encountered as a professional contractor. So I took that as quite a compliment. I've done a few roofs in my day, so it wasn't my first go around. Here is the other side with the retention wall, and make sure you check out the video on how I built that retention wall. I built that on the downhill side because I was digging up the uphill side and adding dirt to the downhill side, and I didn't want it to settle over time. That's why I put a foot of stone around, and also that retention wall is just to keep the project from ever sliding. So let's give you a quick look at the inside of the shed. This is what it looks like before you fill it full of stuff. I plan to build a workbench along that wall, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to build this shed, is I need a place to tinker and do my projects. I have nowhere at this house to do it, so building the shed was part of that. And I didn't put any windows in the shed yet because I just wanted to see what it was like first. You could always add those later. I am going to probably add a window on that outside as well as to the left of the door. That's why I put the doors offset. And as you can see, I'm cutting the fence so that it fits in here nicely. And all I'm doing is I'm using a washer and exterior screw, and I'm fastening it to the wood. Now this prevents rodents from being able to burrow under my shed and build nests, whether it's groundhogs, woodchucks, whatever you would like to call them, rabbits. We got tons of those around, raccoons, tons of those around. And so this is just a preventative thing that I put in there for that. I want to share with you some of the biggest things I learned from this project that maybe you can carry through with your project. First of all, this was a kit. I've built sheds from scratch in the past, and I know how long it takes to make all the cuts. So if you want to speed up the shed build, getting a kit is a pretty decent idea. Even though you may spend a little bit more, it takes half the amount of time to build the actual shed. With that said, one of the things I learned is you should read the instructions from front to back before you even pick up a hammer and a nail. The way I normally approach things is I start at the beginning and I just methodically work my way through all the way to the end. And that led to several problems for me in this project. The first problem was simply that I thought, man, they don't even give you all the tools you need, or the drill bits and things like that you need for they do give some screws to be screwed in. So I used my own, which I had anyway, but it turns out the very last packet that you use for the whole shed build had the drill bits in it. Another thing that caused a problem for me was the walls. It's a 12-foot by 16-foot size shed. So for the 16-foot long walls, they have you build a 12-foot wall section and a 4-foot wall section. In my head, seeing as it's 12 by 16, I built an additional 12-foot wall section for along the back of the shed. When I had the wall piece already put on and I was ready to attach the next wall, I realized it didn't fit. And that's because instead of having a 12-foot long back wall, it's just in about 3 inches on each side, so that exterior wall, the long wall, can go all the way to the back of the shed. So this back wall is not actually 12 feet long. I didn't understand that in the instructions. It just wasn't clear to me, because remember, I prefabricated everything in my garage in advance. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I got two 16-foot walls, a 12-foot wall, and then the wall with the doors is going to be even different. So I just ran into an issue there, and I had to detach the very end studs and then shave off a couple inches and then reattach the end studs to get everything to work. So I share that with you because it was a little bit of a setback. It all worked out and it was fine, but it slowed me down several hours in completing the project. And when you're that far into the project, you just want to finish. Now, if you're thinking of doing a shed project like this, make sure you get all the permits and everything you need in advance. Typically, it's going to cost you a little bit of money to get the permit. So I got a permit, and if you have to take down any trees, make sure that you get any permits you need for that as well. I have more plans for this particular shed. One, I didn't put any windows in right away because I just wanted to get a feel for how I liked it before I decided to put windows in. Now, in the design of it, rather than center the doors that go into the shed, I offset it, because on the one side of the shed, I plan on building a whole workbench area and putting a window there so there's natural light coming in by the workbench. So that was one of the reasons why I did that. And having the door over a little bit is going to give me more room to work along that whole side of the shed. Additionally, I want to wire the whole shed for electricity. Now, when they built this house and they put in the circuit breaker, they finished the whole basement, so there's no access to get in there anymore, and the whole breaker box is 100% full, so I couldn't add a breaker and then run electric out to it. So what I'm going to do is run a heavy gauge extension cord out to the shed in a future video, and just be careful with what I'm running. I'm only going to be running maybe a table saw or a drill press. So I'm not drawing a tremendous amount of electricity, but being the way that I'm going to do it, you wouldn't want to run like a welding type situation. You need more power for that. So anyway, make sure you stay tuned for those videos. If you want to see the related videos that I recorded for the building of this, such as the retention wall, the cutting down of trees, the getting the stump grinder and grinding up the trees, tree stumps, I have a whole series. And I also have a whole bunch of other projects that I've been recording around the house, such as changing a car battery. I got a part of a squeaky floor area of the house. I got, got the things you need to be able to quiet that down. And I mean, fix the garage door. I had to replace the whole motor and track and everything. So all kinds of videos like that coming out. I even had to replace the whole back turn signal for one of my cars. I had to install a trailer hitch and wiring system for one of my cars. So anyhow, lots of projects around the house for this channel. Again, this is my first video for this channel, and I need you to help me make this channel a success. I like being successful, so it's going to depend on you. You need to click that like button, subscribe, share the videos. If there's anybody that you know that's thinking of building a shed, share this video. If you want to check out any of the other videos, stay tuned to the channel. Again, thank you so much for being part of this. Until next time, take care. I'm out of here.